Alrighty, so it's that time of the year again where we are about to have Decision Day 2022, and as I mentioned before, this is going to be probably one of the craziest, if not the craziest Decision Day 2022 we'll ever had because of just still so much playoff implication that is found in both conferences. There's still home field advantage that is being played, and even the top seed in the Eastern Conference that is still up for grabs heading into this Decision Day 2. But as I done before in previous year, when I do preview for these Decision Day game, I'll start doing the preview of the Eastern Conference game first, then I'll preview the Western Conference game. I'm going to do the same thing when I do the review too, once all these Decision Day game is going to happen. And I'm also going to do the review at a hotel, because if you guys have not already known, I am going to be going to one of the Decision Day game. I am going to be going to Minnesota United versus the Vancouver Whitecaps, and I'm actually going to be heading to Minneapolis tomorrow afternoon. So once I do the preview of the Western Conference game, and maybe do one last moving forward series that is kind of part of a pre-record during my trip that I'm going to be having upcoming, and then I'm going to be gone for pretty much a week. Yeah, you know, I am going to basically do all those videos, and that, yeah, you know, it's going to be interesting to see how it is going on. Don't be surprised if my voice is going to be completely shattered like the last time I decided to do a review at a hotel, or the fact that I'm going to be mentally fatigued, because yeah, I am very nervous about that game between the Loons and Vancouver. But I'll talk more about that game and do a preview in terms of all the playoff implication that is going to happen in the Western Conference. Because if you didn't watch my Decision Day key point video that I made a couple of days ago, it's basically a play-in tournament that we're going to get in the Western Conference playoff race. But let's actually talk about the Eastern Conference, and we start off with the first one between Atlanta United versus NYCFC. Now, this game will start at 2:30 p.m. Eastern, 11:30 a.m. Pacific, but the actual kickoff is 2:55 p.m. local time. And you notice I didn't put the kickoff time for any of these games, because pretty much all the game will kick off simultaneously in the Eastern Conference and likewise in the Western Conference. So for me, there was really no point of just writing the same time over and over again. And by the way, that will be the last time I'll mention when exactly the game is going to start, because again, it's basically going to start the same time. Now, in this one, in terms of the all-time meeting, it's a 4 wins, 4 draw apiece for both of these teams. And the key points coming into this one is that, you know, this is definitely one of those games that, you know, in terms of a Decision Day game that has a lot to play for, that's just not the case. I mean, this is one of the least important game in Decision Day, knowing the fact that Atlanta is already eliminated from playoff contention. And for NYCFC, you know, they're already guaranteed to at least have one playoff home game. And, you know, they're maybe hoping to stay in third place with a win or a draw in this one against Atlanta. But the thing that I will say that NYCFC fans maybe kind of don't want to finish in that third position is, one, they might be facing against Orlando or FC Cincinnati in terms of the playoff game, and I guarantee that those are two teams that they do not want to face. And the other reason is that, you know, when I put the quotation mark home, is because they're technically not playing at Yankee Stadium for their playoff game. They're playing at Red Bull Arena, a place that you might as well just call that a road game for NYCFC because of how badly they've done. So in some way, you know, it's a no-win situation for NYCFC, and in some way they were kind of hoping that they would play against their hated rival, the Red Bulls. And, you know, in some way I kind of wanted that, because what a better way to have a playoff matchup that is a New York derby. But also the fact that for NYCFC case, at least they don't have to play at Red Bull Arena, knowing the fact that if we do have a New York derby, it will not be taking place at Red Bull Arena. But it seems like with the way that the Red Bulls are probably going to finish 5th or 4th position, most likely there is a situation where I don't think NYCFC had any chance to be playing against the Red Bulls, and therefore their first playoff game at home technically is going to be at Red Bull Arena. And as I mentioned, those teams that like Orlando and FC Cincinnati, the reason why they don't want to face those teams are some of the best team on the row and are not favorable matchup. But we'll see how this game is going to turn out, and especially for Atlanta United, you know, when you have teams that have already eliminated, you think, well, there's really nothing to play for. They're not really going to play very hard in this match. And to some extent, maybe some players might be thinking about the golf course rather than actually think about playing one last game. But for some guys that are kind of right on the borderline in terms of maybe securing their spot heading into next season and don't want ends up in the contract decline list at the end of the season roster, you know those players are going to play very hard, and they're going to try to prove their manager that they deserve another shot next season and keep in the roster. And yeah, that's going to be interesting to see. Which, speaking of which, that is exactly what the next match is going to be, because the next match is probably the most meaningless match in terms of all the Eastern Conference Decision Day game between the Chicago Fire versus New England. Why is that? Well, both of these teams have already eliminated from playoff contention. Chicago with a 10-8-15 record, while New England with a 10-11-12 record. In terms of the all-time meeting, it's a 34-18-32 to all-time record meeting in favor of the Chicago Fire. But, you know, this is definitely a game that, you know, it's a matchup between two teams that you know there's going to be a lot of players that's going to be playing for their jobs, and that even for a game that could be meaningless, don't be surprised there could be some fireworks in this game, with the way that, you know, I'm pretty sure both of these teams are going to make some big decision in the off season in terms of changing their squad. And this is also the reason why a lot of players are trying to play hard, especially players that is going to be out of contract or potentially have their contract decline heading into next season. You know they're going to be playing very hard for their team. But other than that, you know, for players that have already locked up their contract and most likely is going to be there next season, yeah, there really isn't a lot to play for either of those team. And again, that's where you have a lot of these players that probably are just going to be treating this like a friendly and are just kind of already thinking about the golf course rather than actually thinking about playing an MLS game. Now, moving on in the next match, and now we're going to get to talk about the playoff race in the Eastern Conference, because like I said before in that Decision Day key point video, there's three teams fighting for 2 spots in the Eastern Conference, and one of those teams that is fighting for those 2 spots is FC Cincinnati. Now, they're the only team that are actually not facing head-to-head against each other, because as I'll talk about the next match, that was also another key point to talk about how there's for the first time of what seems like a while from now, we actually have a 7v8 matchup, and we actually have a matchup between a team that is above the red line and a team that is below the red line, and they're facing head-to-head heading into the final game of the season. But at least for Cincinnati, you know, the good news is that if they can get a win in this one, which they're playing against DC United, they pretty much just clinch playoff position. In fact, they don't actually even need to win this game. As long as they don't lose in this game against DC United, then they clinch their playoff position. But here's the problem. They have not been able to get a result against DC United. In fact, DC, despite the fact that they've already clinched the wooden spoon spot, and I wonder in this game, whether are we going to maybe see a ceremonial kind of handoff where, you know, Cincinnati, knowing they are a dynasty of a team that is known as the reign of era, with them winning 3 straight wooden spoon. I wonder, will there be like a little ceremony where they hand off the wooden spoon trophy for the first time in preseason and hand it off to DC United? Like, I think that would have been very fitting to have for the pre-game ceremony, but I guess maybe not. But, you know, in this one, you know, for DC, even though they pretty much know that they are the worst team in the league, at least they can still play some spoiler, and they have a chance to do so because, like I said, FC Cincinnati, they have struggled against DC United. They just cannot figure out. This team still have not got a single win against DC United, and have got free draw and lost 4 times against against DC. And again, for FC Cincinnati, you know, the way to clinch the playoff position, they just need to not lose this one. Or if they in case do lose, they better hope that the Orlando versus Columbus game does not end up in a tie, because if it does end up in a tie, then all of a sudden they find themselves looking outside and get eliminated on the final day. And judging by how Cincinnati has had a lot of heartbreaking moment, and you know, I mentioned before how they're being one of the most cursed team in MLS in recent years, don't be surprised if FC Cincinnati fans will say, yeah, the worst case scenario could actually happen, and that you know, they could lose this game, and then the Orlando and Columbus game could end in a draw. And that also, knowing in previous year where there's some chaotic kind of thing that happened on Decision Day, that's also the other reason why FC Cincinnati fans don't want to think about, or at least they won't be surprised if that, of course, turns out to be the result where they could be eliminated because they did not get a win in this one, and the Orlando and Columbus game just ends up in a tie, and both of those teams make it into the playoffs. But you know, if you're an optimistic Cincinnati fans, you will say that they can have a shot. And again, if there's any times when Cincinnati need to get their first win against DC, this is a time to do so. And especially knowing the fact that they're playing on the road. And again, this season, they've been much more comfortable playing on the road compared to when they're playing at home. This is an opportunity do so. So we'll see whether if that is the case. But now moving on in the next match, and this of course is one of those matchups that I mentioned before, where this is really one of the few times where we actually see a matchup between a team that is just above the red line versus a team that's just below the red line. And anytime when you have a game like this, it's virtually a playoff game for both of these teams, and maybe even kind of like a playing game, because as I'll mention tomorrow in the Western Conference preview, we pretty much have a bit of a play-in tournament going on in terms of those 4 teams that are kind of facing against each other to battle for those 2 playoff spot in the West. But for Orlando City, 13-6-14, while Columbus 10-16-7, and it's not a big surprise that this game was chosen on national television, because again, you're not going to see a matchup as mouth-watering as this one, with the winner pretty much is going to make the playoffs, and the loser most likely could be eliminated from playoff contention. Now, in terms of the all-time meeting, Orlando does have an 8-3-6 record over the Columbus Crew, and again, for the key points in this game, again, for both teams, they'll clinch a playoff position if they can get a win. Now, for Orlando, it's a little bit more tricky because, you know, in case if this game does ends up in a tie, then they're going to have to hope that Cincinnati would lose to DC United, because if that's not the case, then they would be eliminated from playoff contention, knowing they're the team that is below the red line in the East heading into Decision Day. And for Columbus, you know, they can of course get a win or a draw, and as long as they don't lose in this game, then they can basically clinch the playoffs. Which, if you're in that scenario, and especially when you're a road team, I wonder will they maybe be a little bit defensive, and maybe Caleb Porter might be going a little bit defensive, knowing the fact that, you know, a draw of course would be enough. But that being said, saying that, and you look at this Columbus team that has been a lot of trouble in terms of keeping goals out of their own net late in the game. So if this game does remain tied in the latter part of this game, oh boy, Columbus fans are going to be very sweating, because they know that this team have been blowing so many leads in the past couple of games, and in some way a record amount of leads, and that I think they also now have the most drop points that any team has had in a single season in stoppage time. And yeah, I mean, again, this Crew team, and I know that their fans will hope that this team will just sit back and maybe defend the whole game, because, you know, if that is the case and you decide to go row heave mode, yeah, it's not going to end well for the Columbus Crew, and especially for an Orlando team that, you know, they're in a must-win territory. I mean, yes, a tie doesn't eliminate Orlando City, but it's a must-win territory with the way that they don't want to rely on the help of FC Cincinnati and rely on what happened in the other resort. Like, the best way to make it to the playoffs is that you control your own playoff destiny, and here for Orlando, they definitely control their playoff destiny. All they need is a win, and they're basically in the playoffs. But that being said, I am now going to switch boards and look at the last free game in terms of the Eastern Conference matchup on Decision Day. So moving on, in the next matchup, we got Intermiami versus Montreal. So Intermiami coming into this game with a 14-6-13 record, while Montreal 19-5-9. Now, all-time meeting, Montreal does lead the all-time meeting with a 3-1-1 record. Now, there is still definitely something to fight for both of these teams, even though both of these teams have clinched the playoffs. For Miami, it's hard to believe, but they still can technically get a home playoff game. And while they definitely need some help, they first need to get a win in this one against Montreal. But they also need to hope the Red Bulls, of course, draw or lost to Charlotte FC for them to overtake them in the 4th spot. Now for Montreal, it's hard to believe, but they actually still have a chance to get the top seed in the Eastern Conference. And that's kind of crazy, because I thought a couple of weeks ago that looked like it wasn't going to happen. But because of the fact that Philly has been struggling in these past couple of games, and Montreal is able to take advantage of it, they're now in a situation where they can still clinch the top seed in the Eastern Conference, though unfortunately they won't actually get the CONCACAF Champions League this season, because I think in CCL you only allow one Canadian team there, and again, the only path for a Canadian team to get to CCL seems to be the Canadian Championship, which I think that kind of sucks. Like, I don't like that kind of format. I feel like Montreal definitely deserve to make it to CCL if they do finish the top of the Eastern Conference, or even win MLS this year. But, you know, again, they still have a chance to at least have all the home games that is going to be at Stade Saputo, and that the road to MLS Cup in the East can still go through Stade Saputo if Montreal can, of course, clinch the top spot. Though, again, they will need a lot of help. They need to, of course, get a win in this one and hope that Philly lose or tie versus Toronto FC, which, as much as the Union haven't been playing very well in the past couple of games, you don't think that they would actually lose or draw to Toronto, right? I mean, you would think that maybe is the case. And same goes with Miami, where, again, I guess maybe they still have a shot in terms of the playoff game, knowing the fact that, they, even though they don't have a really good record against Montreal, one thing that Miami has been on is they've been on a red hot streak. And I think now you could easily say that they maybe be the team that could be the dark horse heading into the Eastern Conference, because this is a team that I don't think a lot of people have talked about how this is one of those teams that you definitely don't want to face, and that you don't want to face a team that heads into the playoffs red hot and have the momentum. I mean, we saw that last year with what happened with RSL, where, even though RSL technically didn't go into the playoff red hot, they had that big moment to really boost themselves into the playoffs, and the rest is history. I mean, they went all the way to the Western Conference Final, and that could be the same case with Intermiami, with the way that they have just so much momentum with them. What? I think they won like 3 in a row heading into this one, and they make it 4 in a row. You better believe no one want to face Intermiami when playoff time comes, especially when they're playing at home. So yeah, there could be a case that they could do so, and especially the Red Bulls. Even though I know they're playing against Charlotte FC, the Red Bulls have not done very well this season at home, so there could be a possibility that they could drop points to Charlotte FC. Which, speaking of which, that is the next matchup I'm going to be talking about, which is between the Red Bulls versus Charlotte FC, as Charlotte with a 13-3-17 record, while the Red Bulls with a 14-8-11 record. And the all-time meeting, both of these teams have 1 win apiece, and in some way, I was really hoping that this is a matchup where Charlotte can still be alive in playoff contention, and that there could be, just like the Western Conference, a 4-team battle for 2 spots in the Eastern Conference. But unfortunately, it didn't come to fruition with Charlotte drawing their game against Columbus, where they absolutely need a win in that one to stay alive. But the good news is that at least now that they have nothing to play for, they'll still kind of want to play hard and still want to finish strong. And again, Charlotte is another team that there's a lot of guys out there that is going to try to play for a job, knowing the fact that this team, they're going to definitely use the second season as a way to change the roster, because one thing we know about expansion team is that their roster could be very different after just 2 years compared to their expansion season. Whereas for the New York Red Bulls, they can of course clinch a home playoff game with a win or a draw, and Miami lose or tie, or simply if Miami lose or tie against Montreal, they basically clinch a home playoff game. But again, a home playoff game maybe is not the best thing for the Red Bulls, because how they have struggled this season in terms of playing at Red Bull Arena, and that maybe they'll trying to kind of sabotage. Again, I like how both New York team are trying to not play at home, and trying to, or maybe play a more favorable opponent by simply just losing against their opponent, and we'll see whether that is going to be the case in that one. I mean, ideally, I think Garrett Schuver is not going to mention that, because you don't want to have your team talk about how, you know what, let's purposely lose this game so that we don't have a home playoff game because we're more comfortable when we're playing on the road. No, I think he's going to motivate this team, trying to tell that, hey, this is still a game, that the home playoff game is still alive, and that if they can get a win in this one, or just simply don't lose in this game, they of course will at least get to play in front of their home fans. Now, finally, we got the Philadelphia Union versus Toronto FC, and this one is between the Union, who is 18-10-5, and TFC with a 9-7-17. But in terms of the all-time meeting, TFC actually leads the all-time meeting at 13-7-9 over the Union. But the key points coming into this game is that we know the Union, they can of course clinch top seed in the East with a win versus Toronto, or if Montreal does lose or tie at Intermiami. Well, for Toronto, we already know that they've been eliminated from playoff contention, and for the Union, I think this is a good opportunity for them to bounce back, because I know these last couple of games it has not been great whatsoever, but you gotta also maybe put a caveat the fact that they've been on the road these past couple of games, and so far at home this season, this team has been untouchable. Like, this team has just put up ridiculous amount of goals number, and are a free scoring team whenever they play at Subaru Park. And knowing the fact that the Union is facing against a defense that is one of the worst defensive team in the East. Something tells me this could definitely get ugly, and that something tells me there could be a lot of goals that could be scored in this game. And for TFC, you know, as much as there's definitely guys that is playing for jobs in this one, yeah, that maybe is the case on the defensive end too, because you know that there's going to be a lot of guys on that defensive end that probably will not make the squad next season, because that is probably the thing that TFC is going to be really focused on heading into next season. But there you have it. That is pretty much it for my preview of looking at these 7 games that happen in terms of Decision Day Eastern Conference games. Let me know in the comments below what do you think of these 7 games, and as always, let me know in the prediction below what do you think is the score going to be for these 7 games. And like I said, tomorrow I'll do the preview of the Western Conference Decision Day game before I do fly to Minnesota in the afternoon. But until then, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, make sure you guys leave a like, smash the subscribe button, and yeah, I of course will see you guys next time.